Hello, everybody. Welcome to another season preview, our first season preview of the new year. First time we have Russ back as well. Today we have the NPL preview. We can just say NPL because NPL 2 is now called CPL. So we'll try and get used to that. The NPL preview for this season, episode 44 as well, I believe. Michael, first of all, how's it going today? And it's good to be back, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good to be back. Third season. Fingers crossed we can get through a whole season this time around. It's third time's a charm, as they say. So hopefully all smooth sailing. But no, very happy to be back and talking with you gentlemen about Canberra football. So very excited.
Russ, glad to have you back. How's it going, mate?
Yeah, great to be back, actually. And like you say, I'm hoping that it's not curtailed again this year. It's been quite frustrating, hasn't it, the last couple of seasons? So it's good to be back on deck and talking about NPL. And I'm probably still going to call it NPL 2 for the next time. Much like when West Canberra Wanderers changed their name and just called them Woden for ages until we got it on board. So, it'll take some getting into. It's been hard to say Liberty Women's A-League, to be honest, as well, after spending 10 years calling it the W League also. So, but great to be back as usual, and you guys doing a great job again. And 44 not out, edging closer to the half century.
Well, technically, we should be a lot more when you think about it. And technically, we've only really done one full season when you add it up. I think I was saying that to, was it Mitch Stevens or someone, whoever I was doing one of my preseason interviews with, I said, we've only really done one full season when you think about it. Add 2020 and this one together, it's about that.
And you've done about 1,500 separate interviews, though. Do you count them as part of the 44?
No, that's separate. That's separate. That's separate. But yeah, that's it. So let's before we get straight into it, Russ, you mentioned the Liberty A-League Women's. Liberty Women's A-League. You've been doing some sideline reporting. How's that been going for you?
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I'm very lucky that one of the producers I know from back in the day gave me the opportunity to do some sideline stuff, and they're pretty happy. The first one I did up at Combank Stadium, which was a bit nerve-wracking. In the middle of Combank Stadium, they asked me to do a walkout the half-time. Obviously, I was the only one on the middle of the field, which was a bit weird. But talking to a camera, which was way, way, way away, and just making something up as I went along. And they were so pleased with it. They've given me a lot. Been very lucky. I've done Sydney and matches and lots in Wollongong. And this weekend, they've given me the Sydney versus Adelaide 1v2 up in Sydney as well. So that'll be my last one for the season. But it's been a really good experience. It's a bit different on the sideline than being behind the microphone, thinking of questions and stuff when you're watching it. But in the end of the day, it's all football, and it's good fun to be involved, isn't it? And that's why we do it. But yeah, it's been really good fun. Disappointing season for Canberra, of course. They finished strongly, but started off quite woefully. Hopefully there's some change there next season in terms of performances, because we want to see them make the finals. But yeah, it's been a good season all around.
We certainly do. And before we move on as well, let's chat a little bit about the Charity Shield for the men's and the women's. Russ was at both games. Michael, I'll start with you. What did you think of the men's Charity Shield? Because I know you were there for at least a half.
No, I was there for the full game.
The whole game. I thought you said you were going to leave because you're like, oh, where's the link? And I thought, is he going to go home?
Oh, no. I was just asking for the link because my little brother wanted to watch one of the, I think it was that sitter at the end of the first half. He wanted to watch that back on replay and was just asking me where the link was. And I just didn't have my Facebook open. So that's why I just messaged you. And I was just like, do you mind sending it to me quickly? Because he wanted to watch it back. So I managed to make it out there, even though it was the weather wasn't sort of great at the very beginning. I sort of had sat myself sort of underneath the over cover, but the rain was still getting on me, so I managed to scoot back up maybe 4 or 5 rows as well, just to avoid the rain. But in terms of the actual game, I think it wasn't what I was expecting at all. Obviously, I think that's sort of safe to say. I didn't expect it to be so lopsided for Monaro in that match. I thought it would be a lot closer, given the two quality teams that were that they are. Sorry, but I was just so impressed with how Monaro were able to play from sort of minute 1 to minute 90. I mean, maybe to begin with, the first 5-10 minutes were a little bit cagey, just both teams trying to get on the ball, make things happen. But Monaro really just took over. As soon as they sort of scored the first and second goal, that's when they really started to take control. And I mean, seeing some new faces in that team as well have really sort of translated well into Frank's playing style. And I think that was their biggest positive is seeing those new guys come in and play so well and really project a real balance that they have in that team, because they were phenomenal. And I mean, Tigers just couldn't stop them, and they played some excellent football throughout the whole game. I thought their midfield was fantastic as well, just keeping things moving, controlling the game at a really good tempo. So I was really impressed with Monaro. A little disappointed with Tigers because it's not what I was expecting, and we know what quality team they are. But I mean, it's the Charity Shield. It's in that stage where, you know, you're still sort of in pre-season and you're still waiting, you know, for players to possibly come back from injury and things and whatnot. So while there's maybe not a whole lot to take out of it, there's a lot of positives to take out of it for Monaro, because they were fantastic. And I think that was their first title in, I think, 20 odd years or whatever it was. So congrats to them. They fully deserved it. I thought they were excellent.
Russ, what do you think about the match? Of course, you were behind the mic with Andy Bernal.
Yeah, obviously I picked a 7-1 Monaro win because, you know, I know everything there is to know about local football. Now, look, I mean, I think the scoreline was incredible, wasn't it? I mean, I think a lot of us beforehand thought, having watched Tigers in pre-season, that Monaro might beat them because they moved the ball very quickly. But to win by the scale that they did sets a real statement of intent for them in terms of their push for the league title this year. Michael's mentioned the way they played. And we mentioned it last year on a few podcasts where we talked about how good they were when they moved the ball sharply. They moved it 1 and 2 touch. And we saw glimpses of it last year, but perhaps the personnel wasn't the right personnel to enable that to happen to the full extent that we saw on the weekend, which the introduction of Andre Carl at number 9, I mean, he was phenomenal. Probably missed the easiest chance that he had in the evening and scored 3 great goals. The third one, just a world-class finish at any level. And Ben Bassasilk was superb in midfield. I think the addition of Zach McLaren, who's come from nowhere really from Wollongong, to fit into that team has really freed up Ben Bassasilk. And you look at the people that weren't there as well. He's got to bring back in. There's some good quality in that side, some real selection headaches coming up for Frank and his team. But, you know, they're going to be hunted now. People are going to look at that and go, well, that's a side that should be pushing for the title. For the Tigers, as you mentioned, pretty disappointing from them. Big gaps between back four and the front, wasn't there? The midfield was almost non-existent, despite the boys in there working really hard. I thought Rocco Stricker worked his socks off as he always does, running around trying to get involved. And again, they were missing players as well. Let's be honest. Nick Popovic wasn't there, Danny Fabrizio as well. So they were missing a few. You take what you take from pre-season. I don't think it's a death knell for the Tigers at all. If anything else, Canberra Olympic will probably, who face them next in the FFA Cup or the Australia Cup, so that's another thing. They're probably looking at that now going, oh, thanks very much, Monaro. I mean, I'm sure Robbie texted it to Frank then, cheers, we'll expect the backlash. But yeah, it was the performance from Monaro was excellent, and I think it suits its purpose, doesn't it, the pre-season. And Ryan Grogan, no doubt, will watch the video back, even though it'll be a bit of a video nasty for him, and he'll make some changes. Whether he's got the personnel to do that, I'm not sure, defensively. Because that's where their issues were, but weren't so sure about them last year, and look what happened. So let's see what goes on there, and I'm sure they'll bounce back.
Yeah, I wouldn't write off Tigers so far yet, but it was a very impressive performance from Monaro. And quickly before we move into it, the Charity Shield, you were for the women's, you were also there with Jeremy McGann behind the mic. What did you think of that? It was a emphatic display from Canberra Croatia. It
was a strange one, wasn't it? Because they scored twice in the first 10 minutes and then 3 in the last 4 minutes. So it really gave the scoreline a bit of a gloss that perhaps it didn't deserve on West Canberra Wanderers, who I thought battled really hard, and they've got some really good talent in that team. Hadn't seen a lot of them before. Ginger Oliver in midfield, Joanna Biddle up front. The pace that they play the game with is going to cause issues for some teams in that competition. Canberra Croatia, aren't they? They've got able to have Brittany Pullenby on the bench and still score 6 goals, and she comes on and gets one herself. Good to see Bella Baric back after 2 seasons of bad injury and see her back on the field as well. And I think for Zoran Glavinic, I think we expected Croatia to win again. I think the scoreline was very harsh on the Wanderers, but a good performance, even though we had a bit of a delay in the second half when the rain decided to come sheeting down and there was a bit of lightning. But the Charity Shield's a Charity Shield. And I just want to say very much a big thank you to Gavin and Chelsea Van Ziel at White Rhino Property for sponsoring the broadcast of that match as well. Without them putting up the funds to show that on Bar TV, we wouldn't have been able to see it. And of course, the group from Bar TV and the camera crew for their usual quality production.
Indeed, I echo all those thoughts as well. And before we get into it, we would like to welcome our first ever and new sponsor to the show.
We here at M&M Podcasts are very proud to talk to you about our very first sponsor called Linemarkit, a new local business emerging in the sport and technology arena.
That's right, Michael. Linemarkit is a new business operating in the ACT and surrounding regions, and their product delivers accurate line markings for all sports and special functions using the latest technology.
That's right, Matt. And this includes all sports that we either take part in or have watched on TV at some point. And this ranges from football, rugby league, rugby union, hockey, Aussie rules, gridiron, baseball, softball, athletic tracks of any size and associated disciplines and more.
Yeah, look, that sounds like it covers a lot of ground, Michael. And playing right now are the images and videos of this machine at work. And by God, it's a beauty. If you're interested in these services or know someone that would be, do not hesitate to contact the business owner of this fantastic new initiative, Ken Yalg, through his email, linemarket@tpg.com.au, or his work mobile, 0493 241 646. Contact details and social media pages will be available to access at our Facebook page, M&M Podcast. But if you are watching this on Facebook, it will be attached to the post.
That's absolutely right, Matt. And you know better than anyone else here at M&M Podcasts, we believe this business is fantastic for local Canberra sport and surrounding regions, whilst it couples its work with the finest new technologies.
Let's get straight into it. Belconnen United, this season, their coach is Michael Zukoski. Their 2021 position finish was 5th place, and their points and win-loss record was 6 wins, 5 draws, 6 losses, and points was 23 points. Now, Belconnen United last season, they started pretty well, and then they had this big patch in the middle where they didn't do so well. They didn't win a match in a certain amount of games, but then they finished quite strongly, actually, and they were only something like 2 points off the top 4 before lockdown came into effect. So Fab Michelli's side was starting to get back into the rhythm there. There's been a decent amount of changes at the club, like Russ is going to mention soon, but the main one is Fab Michelli has left. He has joined the youth coaching ranks at Western Sydney Wanderers. So once again, best of luck, Fab, there. And Michael Zukoski comes in, who last season was, of course, in charge of the Belconnen women's side, the NPLW side there. This is his first men's first grade job in Canberra, at least. So it's going to be interesting to see how he sort of transitions. But he's got more experience than people would think at his young age. So it's going to be interesting to see how he gets there. And he has a lot of players that he does know and has worked in the past as well. But they've lost a few key players like Michael Piccolo, Jordan Thurtell in goals, both McCaws, Luca Flores, just to mention a few. They brought in the likes of Alex Connell, Chris Ray, John O'Turex. So Russ, I'll let Russ do the main ones there. But for me, it's going to be interesting to see how Belco changes, because obviously we're used to a lot of changes in Canberra football, but this is quite a few changes, probably more than a lot of sides. But like I mentioned, a decent amount of the players that Michael has brought in, he has worked with before. That will, I would say, help him in the long run. And not a lot of people have been talking about Belco in terms of big things this season. I'm sure Michael will want to prove that wrong, but that's probably how they'd like it, for people to sort of write them off. So it's going to be interesting to see how they go. But a lot of people haven't been talking about Belco in terms of pushing for that top 4. Russ, what are your thoughts on Belco this season? And if you want to give us the ins and outs, that would be greatly appreciated. Except there seems to be a lot there.
There's a lot. I won't go through them all, because we'll put up a post at some stage with all these on, so everyone can have a look at them. But yeah, Michael Zukoski, as you mentioned, coming in. And you mentioned that the key point there is that he's bringing in people that he knows. And when you're a new coach, it's always good to bring in people you know so you can get your philosophy off and running. And to be honest, he's got a couple of young boys over from Canberra Olympic. There's been a lot of swapping and toing and froing between those two clubs. Quite interested in the signing of Luke Valloni from Adamstown Rosebuds. As a striker, he looks very sharp in pre-season. Juan Ospina's come across from West Canberra Wanderers as well, the Colombian striker. So their strike force has had a little bit of a change around. Jonathan Kersberg, that we saw from Canberra Olympic in midfield a bit last season, has joined the team. And of course, Nick Zukoski's back out of a sabbatical as well. So that's a few. You mentioned probably the key one, Jordan Thurtell out, Alex Connell in from Canberra Olympic. Now, Alex Connell was at Belconnen United many, many years ago before he went to Melbourne. Good goalkeeper. You're losing a quality one. You're replacing him with something decent. You mentioned some of the outs there, the McCaws. They've lost Max Mellick as well, Darren Bailey, Taylor Beaton as well as called time on his career. So they've lost a lot. They've recruited a lot. From what you could tell from pre-season, the results, they've had a few results go their way. They had a good 4-3 win on the weekend over the Knights. They've beaten White Eagles 2-0, but they've lost a couple of interstate games as well. But we often say this in pre-season, you can't really tell what's going on. For Michaels, I think it's key that they get off up and running early. They need some points on the board. He's got to get those new boys into gel and become a cohesive unit. And if you can do that, they'll be there or thereabouts pushing for it. But it's going to be a tough one for him. First grade gig in senior men's level, and I'm sure the pressure will start to mount if the results don't go his way. But you know what Michael's like. He's a very enthusiastic coach, brings a lot of quality to the table. So we wish him all the best.
We certainly do. Michael, who do we have next up?
Next up, we've got Canberra Croatia with Dean Ugrinich at the helm again. They finished second in 2021, and their record last season was 11 victories, no draws, and 6 losses for 33 points. And they were obviously last year's Charity Shield winners as well. So, I mean, they started the season, the 2021 season, very well last year, including 2 victories against Tigers. However, they lost their last encounter against the eventual winners there. They probably wouldn't have been happy with, some of the results which led them to dropping behind Tigers. We saw Tigers really extend their lead at the top of the table throughout the season last year when Canberra Croatia suffered that little bit of dip in form. But in saying that, by the time finals would have came around, you can never count Canberra Croatia out. They've got so much experience when it comes to finals football, and I think their trophy cabinet speaks for itself. So we know what we would have expected at that time of the year, but unfortunately, like we mentioned at the top, we just didn't get to see that because of COVID. But there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of change at Canberra Croatia this season. They're a team, like I mentioned, that you can't count out at any stage of a season, and no one's really talked about them too much. I kind of feel as though that they've been flying a little bit under the radar this preseason. There's not been a lot of news sort of in and around the club, and nothing really sort of substantial that's sort of circulating anywhere. So, I mean, they're sort of just really going about their business. They're preparing for yet another season. We know what kind of quality that they've got in that squad, and we can always expect them to do well. Russ, can you give us the ins and outs for Canberra Croatia this preseason and your thoughts on them overall? Like I mentioned, maybe they've been flying under the radar a little bit, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, keeping their cards very close to the chest most of the time in terms of their signings as well. They're 6 in 7 outs. I mean, they've lost the likes of Daniel Cobertado, Thomas James, Kalfas and Kishler, of course, we'll talk about later when we talk about the Panthers. Nikola Taneski has gone back to Sydney, and Dr. Matthew Waters, as he is now, because he got his doctorate on board. He's gone down to Melbourne to work down there. But they brought in some big names as well, and some names that we're obviously familiar with on the football scene here in Canberra. Stephen Dominici, perhaps the biggest of them, from Monaro Panthers. They've been toying around signing him for a number of years now. They've got him on board. Michael Piccolo, you mentioned, gone from Belconnen across there. Cassidy Tando, another Belconnen player that's joined them in defence. Christian Tanoski, who was a Canberra Olympic for a couple of seasons ago, and prior to that for many years, he's going to bring some quality to their midfield. And they've signed Tibor Kamara from Green Gully. Now, Tibor Kamara was a prodigy back in the day. I've seen him play a little bit in pre-season, and he's getting himself into shape. And he's going to be a good acquisition for them, to be honest. And Marco Gaia has come from Tuggeranong United and slotted into the left-back role as well, from what I saw in pre-season. They've won a couple of games quite convincingly. I went, my father's over from the UK, and I took him down to watch South Coast United in the friendly, and they gave them a bit of a battering, and then they lost to Blacktown City, but narrowly, in horrendous conditions. So keeping their cards close to their chest, I think the players they've brought in, adequate replacements at least, if not better than the ones that some of them have left. So Dean works like that. He'll bring the players in of decent quality. They've got lots of talent across lots of areas. Really looking forward to see Mate Busek step up again this year. Last year was supposed to be a breakout for him, but because of the curtailed season, we didn't see as much of him as we would have liked. But I think we'll see a lot of him this season. And of course, the quality of people like Luke Pilkington still shines through as well. And Matty Gerbischer, that goes on and on, doesn't it? And Sam Brown in net. So you talk about early season title favourites, and even if they had the same squad as last year, you'd say Canberra Croatia will be there or thereabouts, and that's the least that club expects.
And before we move on, I have one question for you in terms of Canberra Croatia. There was a few matches there where Michael mentioned them, but there was some where they really, really got caught on the counter some days. Like would you say like some of the people he's brought in as well would sort of help them in that regard when they do face a team, for example, like Olympic, where just on their day they were to be fair, they annihilated in that game. I know it was just one game, but there was a few games where they really got caught out.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think Gungahlin United was another.
Gungahlin, that's the one.
Where they were caught a bit one-paced and a bit flat-footed. And you look at the fact that Ryan Keir sometimes got caught without being able to trap back. The players they brought in now will complement that, and they shouldn't be so open on the break. I think those two results obviously were freaks.
Yeah.
We were at the Gungahlin game. We called that one the week after the Olympic game. And if you watch the Olympic match back, if you can track it down on Bar TV or YouTube, that first half, Canberra Croatia could have been 3 or 4 up. They went in at the break, 1 apiece. And then every time the Olympic got a corner or a free kick, they were away.
Yeah.
And when you've got people like James Crawford and Isosra Hegi, the pace that they've got was just too much to handle. And poor Sam Brown, I think I watched the replay when I got home that night. He didn't have a save to make, and yet he picked the ball up the net 5 times. There was nothing he could do about it.
Yeah.
It was one of those days. But yeah, it's a valid point. They're not getting any younger, Luke Pilkington and Matt Gerbischer and those kind of players. So the evolution of the team needs to be built around some more pace. And I think they brought that in this year.
In saying that, though, I don't doubt that Canberra Croatia will be in the top 4 by the time the season ends, because they just have that much quality.
Brave man to bet against being not being in the top 4.
You certainly will
I'm
be.
Certainly not one of them.
Even that season where they started really poorly, it was before we started covering, and they started really poorly, but they still, despite the poor start, they still ended up in the top 4.
They lost the first 4, didn't they?
And they still
one of the first 5, and still were in the top 4.
That's another reason why you can't count them out at the end of the day. So let's move on now to Canberra Olympic, which is actually the match that they first play each other, Canberra Olympic and Canberra Croatia. We'll mention that at the end of the show. Their coach this season, once again, is Robbie Katnack. 2021 position was 7th place. 2021 points and win-loss record was 5 wins, 3 draws, 9 losses, 18 points. Now, Canberra Olympic probably didn't end up in the position that they would have liked. However, they did have a young squad. So this is something we talked about with Robbie whenever I had him on for interviews. He talked about how they were just trying to find that consistency. Because when they turned it on, they really turned it on. And we mentioned that winning against Canberra Croatia. And there were other victories as well, like against Monaro, for example, at the start of the season. So they really did have some really good moments there with the Isosari Hegi up front. You mentioned Crawford as well, and they did very well in defense in those matches. They have a lot of pace where they can break on the counter. And they've added a lot of depth. And we talked about the young squad, and that's the way Olympic want to go. And it's fair to say, even with all the money that they spent per se, it still sort of fits their philosophy of younger players, but they're just probably more well-known players in Canberra that are younger players like Flores and the McCaws and players like that. And it probably really, really helps them in that regard. Like I can just imagine Flores now just sort of working off with add that pace to the already outstanding pace they've got up front. So Olympics a team that probably last season, obviously they wouldn't have been happy with where they finished, but in terms of where they were when they competed well, they really competed well. And you could have really picked anyone on their day could beat anybody. So it's going to be really interesting to see where Canberra Olympic end up at the end of this season. So Russ, give us some key ins and outs that we didn't mention, and your thoughts on Canberra Olympic this season.
Yeah, I think this time last year we sat there and looked at their squad list and thought they might struggle with a lot of the young boys coming through. They'd lost a lot of experience, and then they went out and got 15 points or so from the first 5 games or 6 matches, and we were left looking rather silly, weren't we? In terms of the ins and outs, they've obviously brought in plenty from Belconnen. You mentioned Flores, both McCaws, Max Melik. Seamus Carr's come across from West Canberra Wanderers as well. Adds a bit more experience to that backline as well. And they've re-signed Mark Shields from Queanbeyan City, so he'll add a little bit more experience to that young group as well. And his role might be quite interesting to see where he slots into that role in terms of what he brings and where Robbie sees him helping that young group young group to mould. You can imagine it now with Shields, if they're playing 3 up front with Flores one side and Isosa the other, all of a sudden, Mark's going to flourish in that role with his little passes and his little putting those boys into gaps. they've lost a couple, as you mentioned, but I think, to be fair, Robbie would look at the ones he's lost, and they were fringe first team players for him anyway. They didn't play too many matches last year. They all played bits and bobs, but he would be very happy with his recruitment that he's brought in. And, they'll be better than last year, I think, in terms of what they've got now, in terms of their group. And Robbie's had another season under his belt. There's a real philosophy with Canberra Olympic, again, like Canberra Croatia, that they should be making finals. There's pressure on them. But I think Robbie's stood quite firm here, and there's been some talk about them needing to sign some big name players to boost their ranks and get them into the top four. But I think Robbie's got his philosophy. He wants his younger group in, and the ones he's brought in, as you mentioned, Matt, really fit into that philosophy, into what he's trying to build there. So looking forward to seeing them play this season. Their pre-season results have been a bit mixed. I don't think they've had a full squad out on the field yet. They beat Brindabella 5-1, but lost 5-1 to Albion Park, drew with the White Eagles and Queanbeyan. And on the week before last, they went down 3-2 to A&E Hawker, but there were 6 or 7 players missing again there as well. So make of that what you will. Looking forward to seeing them play. I think it's going to be a dynamic team. They'll play fast-paced football and should be there or thereabouts at the end of the season, I think.
Michael, who do we have next up?
Well, we've got Gungahlin United, coached by Marcel Munoz again. They finished third in 2021, and their record was 7 wins, 5 draws, 4 losses. So 26 points accumulated for them last season. They were a little slow for their liking last season, especially what we've sort of witnessed with Gungahlin over the last couple of years in the form they've been able to produce. However, they started to click after the slow start, and they ended up actually playing some really good football. As we expect, we know the philosophy that Marcel likes to put out there on the football pitch. It's one of the most sort of attractive styles in our Canberra football game when you weigh up all the sides in the competition and how they play their football. Gungahlin is definitely up there with one of the better teams in the competition. Lots of additions to this squad that you're going to get into, I'm sure, Russ, but I'll go to name a few. They've got both Haptomariams returning as they were at Monaro last season. Tom McLaughlin is back as well. Also, he was also at Monaro last season as well. And, they've added those players already with their quality midfield that they possess. And they've obviously got the outstanding Bernardo Madrid up top to find the back of the net whenever they need. He's been such a presence up front for that football club and has a great eye for goal. So, I mean, when you look at this Gungahlin United squad, I think they've always had a pretty good balance between youth and experience. And I think their squad this season highlights that again. And I expect them to do very well, even pushing for that title. So, I mean, there's going to be obviously a lot of teams pushing for, not only the top 4, but there'll be those sides that are sort of breaking away, considering themselves, title contenders. And I think Gungalin's going to be one of those teams, especially if they can just build if they can build strong form throughout the season and show a good amount of consistency throughout the year. I think they'll just be very hard to stop. They've got the talent to beat anyone in the competition, and I expect them to do very well. Russ, the ins and outs. Sorry, I was just going to say the ins and outs for Gungahlin United this season, and how well do you think they'll go this season around? Obviously, 3rd place finish in the shortened season last year. They've obviously brought back some players that they're familiar with, and certainly that Marcel's familiar with as well.
Yeah, Marcel built that squad, didn't he, a couple of years back, and we had a really short season because of COVID, and they were really hoping to get to the FFA Cup that year, and I mean, with that squad, he's got them back, the trio that you mentioned there as well. And Felipe Bernardo Madrid, which you mentioned, who is a key attacking for them. Actually, funny enough, I was looking at Dribble on the weekend to get the scoreline from the Woden Valley Majura FFA Cup tie, Australia Cup tie. We'll get there one day. I will get there. It said 3-2 to Woden Valley, and the winning goal was scored by Felipe Bernardo Madrid. So something's gone wrong there, I think, unless he's had a sneaky transfer to Woden Valley Soccer Club in the off season that we don't know about. I did ask him.
If anything, it would be to Madura because he's the technical director.
He was sent texts from the game to give me updates for the broadcast that we had. So I was like, that's a very talented man being able to text us and then score against his own team that he's technical director of. So well done there, Felipe. Big loss for Gungahlin. Josh Laguda has headed up to Northern Territory. I think he's got a job in the police force or something now. And so, yeah, congrats to him. But they've lost him in goal, and he's a big presence that they've got. Son James Christus from Canberra Olympics, a good opportunity for him to step up into that role. Looking as well, Roy Anderson's gone to South Melbourne. He was terrific last season, I thought, for them. So bringing back the Habsomans and McLaughlin does help cover that role. And Tommy Kirklich, of course, a son for Tigers. We saw him in action on the weekend. So Marcel, we know he loves his 3-5-2. He loves to play with the three at the back. The biggest plus for Marcel is a fit Jack Green. I mean, he missed a lot last season, didn't he, with that injury? Saw him pre-season. In the first run out he was puffing a bit, obviously, because he's not been around for a while. But a fit, firing Jack Green makes all the difference to Gungahlin United. We've said it before. But it's worth saying again, if he's on his game, they're a different side. He leads by example. He brings everybody else into play. He's got great distribution and he's a threat of set pieces. So keeping him wrapped in cotton wool and getting him fit and on the field is key for them. Pre-season results for them, of course, they're buckets of goals. They always do. They love scoring goals. They've got plenty of talent to do so. Michael John, Mishko Namoski, Felipe, you mentioned it. Even without Felipe on the weekend, they won 6-3 against the White Eagles in an entertaining friendly. So it'd be interesting to see them go. You mentioned, Michael, that they're probably going to be there or thereabouts. They were last year, and they probably will be again. They're one of those sides that will definitely be looking for the top four, if not higher.
And Gungahlin is, you mentioned it there, and I think Laguda is a big loss, but I did think Christus played very well whenever he played for Olympic last season. Absolutely. He made some absolutely fantastic saves. Yep. I would say for me, the highlight of probably of what Gungahlin are building in that midfield at the moment, and it was because when I had a chat to Chris Kajani, he mentioned how they had to rebuild the team last season. It was they had a bit of a slow start. When they clicked, they really clicked. But now they've sort of brought back the players that sort of left. Do you think when it starts competitive, it'll actually take a bit of time for them to get back into the sort of the team they had, or do you reckon it'll just be seamless?
Well, as much as Jack Green plays a big part in the way that works, so does Nick Rathjen. He allows those in front of him to play. He plays that 6 role where he just wanders about in front of the back four, distributes the ball, wins the ball for them, and he's a key component of that setup. If he can play in that role, and they push Tom McLaughlin further forward and Jeremy Habsomans further forward and release those front three, then they can cause problems to everybody. But they need him to stay fit as well. I think when he doesn't play there, they struggle a little bit in terms of defensive. You've seen it open up a bit. There was a couple of games season before last where they were caught on the break with those 3 at the back. And I think Marcel will have a plan B up his sleeve this year about how he wants to go to a back four when necessary as well, and keeping his players fit and on the park. Yep.
Gungahlin is, I'll be shocked if Gungahlin aren't fighting for that top 4, considering all the quality they've added. They're going to be a real quality side this year, especially that midfield. It'll be interesting to see if anyone can dominate them in midfield this season.
Yeah.
Moving on, next we have Monaro Panthers. Obviously, after that fantastic victory in the Charity Shield, their coach once again is Frank Keisha in his second year at the club, in terms of first grade anyway. 2021 position was 4th place. 2021 points and win-loss record was 7 wins, 4 draws, 6 losses, 25 points overall. 2021 FFA Cup qualifying final runners-up, 2 Tigers, and 2022 Charity Shield winners, of course. Now, Monaro are a team that was beginning to hit their peak. We've mentioned this a bit, but they were one of the teams that started slowly, and there was a lot of question marks, naturally, considering how many players they brought in. And Frank will probably be the first one to tell you, when they bring in someone like Frank, he's expected to hit the ground running immediately. And they did hit the ground running, and they ended up 4th before the lockdown, but they really were starting to hit their stride. Andy Bernal is also in now to help as a part of the coaching staff there in the first grade setup. We've mentioned it before on the show, plenty of knowledge and experience he brings there. Bit of a new look side with some key players leaving, such as Sam Rossbarken. And I mentioned, I sung his praises a lot last season. I thought Sam Rossbarken is part of what made that team click when they started to get in the rhythm. He was playing at fullback originally, then him in midfield, breaking up play, starting play. He did all the dirty work that was necessary for Monaro. And you mentioned a few of the players there in your Charity Shield review that will be replacing him. So that's good for them, because if they didn't replace Sam, I think he would have been That would have been a key spot that they would have needed to replace, but it seems like they've done it. You mentioned Andre Cole coming in. He's done a fantastic job. Kishta and Kalfas, we've mentioned their quality before plenty of times in the past, and De Franceschi's another one. Russell mentioned the rest. Like we mentioned, very, very impressive display, and I think Bernal mentioned it in only the way he can, very bluntly, that if that he believes that Monaro will be a top 4 side at the very least this season. And after that performance, it'll be tough to stop them. But like you guys both mentioned, they're going to have a target on their back now after that victory. So it's going to be really interesting to see how everyone sort of shapes up against Monaro. And after that statement victory, they're going to be they might sort of play it down when they talk to everyone else, but they'll be pushing for that title. Now, Russ, what are the more ins and outs, and what do you think about Monaro this preseason or this season?
It's funny because the pressure's going to come from people like us talking about them and pushing them up.
It's not just us, trust me, it's everyone that'll be talking about it. Frank knows what it's like.
Yeah, exactly. And this goes back to what we talked about with Michael Zukowski. When you come in as a new coach, you want to bring in players that are going to buy into your philosophy, into the way you want to play the game. Frank started that last year. Obviously, the second part of his process is this year, and he's got a group of players now that he's brought in that he feels that will buy into that. You look at his back four now with Wilson, James Wilson at full back, then David Jenkins is now partnered with Adam De Franceschi, two proper centre backs with solid defensive nous, and then left back you either go Josh Calabria or Darren Bailey. Now Bailey could move further forward, so he's got players that can play in different positions. He's got a solid defensive unit. Jordan Thurtell comes in to replace Evan Alexander Ridley, so they haven't lost anything in the goalkeeper department. And you mentioned the players going forward. You mentioned Kalfas and Kishta. Jay Selden's another one. He came off the bench on the weekend. You would have seen his goal, the sixth one, beautifully taken.
Fantastic.
They've got to come off the bench as well. They've got depth that perhaps they didn't have last year now. And I was massively impressed with young Zach McLaren I mentioned from Wollongong. He came on and helped possibly made Ben Bassasilk a better player, who I thought was possibly man of the match on the weekend for Monaro Panthers. And then, of course, you get further up the park and you've got your man, Andre Carl, who just can't stop scoring. And it's great for a club to have a player that can put the ball in the back of the net when you're creating half chances. And he'll be disappointed he didn't get the fourth. But it's a team now that's built to push towards the title. It's a team that's built to push towards winning the Australia Cup qualifying round. See, I did it there.
There you go. There you go.
No time's the charm.
Time's the charm. It's a team built towards that, and they're quite demanding there now. Of Frank, he's aware of that, and the group he's brought in, he needs to make them tick. And he's got selection headaches, and of course you've got people like Kofi Danning we haven't mentioned. There's a young lad called Carl Senior that they brought in from Wollongong as well that we haven't seen much of yet, but they've got high hopes for. So you look at those people. Adam News, another one. How does he fit them all in? How does he keep them all happy? Long season, injuries play a part, of course.
COVID as well. We haven't mentioned that yet.
Yeah, we haven't. We're trying not to, man. We're trying to keep it positive. It's difficult, isn't it, for him now to sit down and go, well, let's say the first round was next week, which luckily for them it isn't. How does he change that team? Does he bring those boys in? Does he go with the 11 he's got? Luckily, we don't have to make those decisions. We're not paid to do that, which is great. No. But I'll be massively surprised with the group he's brought in and the way they've gelled and the way they're playing football at the moment if they're not close to the 4, if not higher, at the end of the season. Yeah,
I forgot to mention Calabria there. He was definitely a player that he not only did he keep them ticking at the back, he ended up getting them back into a lot of games last season. Yeah. And Bassasilk, like you mentioned, I thought he was, probably one of Monaro's most underrated players last season. I thought he did a very good job. And like you mentioned, if he's freed up even more than what Sam made him last season, he's going to be another threat in that regard.
Yeah, and for the risk of sounding like a broken record, we've said this many times on this show before. You don't win championships with 1 to 11. Not in this league. You need to have a decent bench from 12 through to 17, if not 18, 19. So when those inevitable injuries and suspensions come in, you've got real quality to bring into your first grade squad. And when you build a squad like that, obviously it comes with the added problems of juggling people and making them happy and keeping them till that June transfer window and hoping you can ride out that storm if they're not playing many minutes. Many questions, of course, but I think they've got a squad to challenge.
I have just been very impressed with the sort of progression and development that the club has made over the last 2 years, because previous to that, they obviously had been struggling for a long time in the competition, not getting anywhere near the top 4 final spots. And obviously there was a lot of conversations around, where they were going and if they were ever going to sort of turn things around. And I think Frank obviously has a massive part to play in like the change that they've had over the last couple of years. And I think you mentioned it last season that they sort of struggled, and I think that was a little bit expected given the number of players that Frank had brought in into the club and into his squad. And we sort of started to really see how good Monaro can be as the season progressed. And I think this season will be a massive season for them in terms of looking to secure top 4 again, and possibly, going for a title as well. When, before 2 years ago, this wouldn't have even been a conversation. So I've just been very impressed with how they've been able to build the squad over the last couple of years. I think Frank's made a massive difference, and they played great football too. They played great football in the Charity Shield, like I mentioned at the top of the show, and I'm expecting big things from Monaro. But moving on now to the newly promoted O'Connor Knights. So we've got some fresh meat, as they say, in the NPL, a new club that will be competing in NPL this season, with coach Miro Trunic at the helm. They obviously won what was called NPL 2 last season, finishing first place in 2021. And their overall record was very impressive, even though the season was cut short. Like we've mentioned, they managed 13 wins, 2 draws, and 1 loss. I mean, they were excellent last season. They were insanely consistent, and just a step above, a large majority of those teams in CPL, as it's called now. But they're gonna, they're making that step up now in competition, having been promoted, and we're going to really see what they're made of. It's their first time that they're returning to the top flight in Canberra football in 13 years. So that's just a monumental achievement for the club to get back where they feel they belong, and now they're here. And you can expect them to make a lot of noise, I think, this season. O'Connor being the new boys on the block again. Trunic has a lot of coaching experience in the top flight here in Canberra. Coaching Canberra, Croatia, and Tuggeranong United, just to mention a few. They wasted no time adding depth and more players to their rank. Moses Garang, Edward Coggan, and Regan Walsh, just to name a few reinforcements that have come into that squad. And it'll be very interesting to see how they perform, given that they're the promoted team in Canberra for a while. Obviously, we haven't had promotion relegation for a very long time in Canberra. So I think for all parties involved, the club, fans, and the competition in general, it's going to be very interesting to see how they go. And I'm expecting some fireworks from them for sure. I think it's going to be, obviously when they come up against Canberra Croatia, just to name one match in particular, I think that's going to be great. Russ, do you mind just going through some of the ins and outs concerning O'Connor Knights, and what are your expectations for the first promoted club into NPL for the first time in a while? Like I mentioned, what are your expectations for O'Connor Knights this season?
You mentioned fireworks, Michael. Are you talking literally or metaphorically? Because
probably both.
They don't mind a bit of pyro, do they?
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward, to be honest. Look, I mean, that stands out for me straight away. O'Connor Knights versus Canberra Croatia.
Yep.
2 Croatian clubs in the capital going toe to toe at Deakin Stadium and O'Connor. You can guarantee there's going to be a really big turnout on that day. There's going to be noise. There's going to be colour. We haven't sorted the roster out for what games we're going to be covering on Bar TV, NPL TV, I should say now. But I can almost guarantee those 2 are going to be at
I'll
the
be
top
very
of the
disappointed
list.
if it's not. Very disappointed.
Just because it's not only going to be something that's going to attract the crowd locally. I think, all over Australia, when 2 Croatian clubs meet, there's always a big rivalry. There's people watching, and even overseas as well. So that's just a side point, but I'm really looking forward to those 2. In terms of what we can expect from them, well, they brought in a lot of players. I mean, you mentioned a few of them there. They've got Gabriel and Jacob Ayul coming from White Eagles as well. They've brought in some decent young talent in Connor Minot-Smith and Ryan Zanata and Seb Arance as well from under 23s. Michael Adams is a great signing for them from Queanbeyan City. I think he brings a lot of quality and playmaking ability into that group. Andrew Slavic has come across from Tuggeranong with, as you mentioned, Walsh and Eddie Coggan. And Nikola Barisic is back from a sabbatical So he adds more depth to that squad as well. Massive turnover of players. I've seen them in pre-season. They've been in and out, as you'd expect from a side that's blooding a lot of players. They ran with a really big squad for quite a long time before they cut a fair few players only towards the end of January. And obviously that is going to affect the way you prepare. And I think they're looking to run with quite a deep squad this year because they know with the group of players that they've got that perhaps they're not quite up to speed in terms of fitness for NPL 1 yet, but they'll make sure that they are by the start of the season. They'll bring passion and they'll bring a lot of nous in that group with the coaching group with Miro and Alex, as you spoke about as well before. Looking forward to it. I mean, obviously a promoted club, you automatically think, well, have they got enough to stay in this division? With the players they brought in, it's almost impossible to say now, isn't it? Because the group that got promoted, they're not all there. But the key ones are like Paddy O'Rourke. I know Tigers flirted with him for a bit pre-season. He, I think, is now committed to this group. Nico Kresic, they've got so many forward options. It's not funny. And then you've got the experience of people like Martin Zygmunt at the back as well. So going to be interesting to see how they go. I'm thinking, as per West Canberra Wanderers last season and as per Canberra Olympic, they need to get off to a good start to give them the points on the board because quite a lot of it is mental at this stage. Psychologically, can they compete with Premier League sides? They'll believe they can. Pre-season has suggested they're not far away. They'll be a good watch.
And Miro is a coach that has been there, done that before. He obviously not only has he coached O'Connor before, he's coached the likes of Tuggeranong, and that's where half these players come in. So there's a bit of familiarity there, and also, of course, Canberra Croatia as well. Not to mention many other clubs. So he'll know what it takes to try and get this group there. Not just that, I think from a Canberra point of view, it's not only do O'Connor. Obviously, they were the first team to come up, so they want to also stay up. And Alex Tiranich in our preseason interview mentioned that as well. He's like, we don't want to be the team to come up and then go straight back down. But also, I think for Canberra, if O'Connor can have a really good showing this season, that only does well for the whole promotion relegation argument. They are one of many clubs that feel they were unjustly taken out of the competition 13 years ago to make way for a new format. So they're going to prove that they belong. And we mentioned on the podcast quite a few times last season, we've been covering NPL2/CPL for a while, and clubs like O'Connor, and it would be not right to not mention ANU either, since they were neck and neck last season. They didn't look out of place when they versus FFA Cup squads in the FFA Cup qualifying rounds last season. I remember O'Connor especially taking Monaro to the limit in that match specifically. So they'll have a point to prove, and they have a squad that can do it. And I think they'll surprise a few people this season. Can they do it over the whole season? That's where the question comes in. But they definitely have the hunger to do it, and they definitely have the players as well. So I'm really intrigued to see how they go this season. And if they have a really good showing, that's all the best, especially for the CPL. It'll give a lot of hope for the CPL clubs that want to push forward this season.
You talk to the Knights, you talk to Miro, you talk to Alex. They actually believe that they shouldn't be replacing a team like Tuggeranong United. They should be joining them alongside people like White Eagles and ANU in an expanded Premier Division with 14 teams in it. Was that 14? Is that right? No, 12 teams in
12
it.
teams. 12 teams.
So, and 22 matches or whatever it might be. And we all look at that and go, that would be superb, And those teams have got the fan bases and the support to actually support a Premier League side. So, yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing them play this season, and they should be good to see.
And you mentioned that the wanted expanded format. If O'Connor do really well, then that would, in my opinion,
it would be a tick for the box.
A tick for that box.
I think the only difference between these sides when you watch them play in the FFA Cup is they get to about 60, 65 minutes and they run out of steam against the NPL 1 teams, mainly because the NPL 1 teams train more often, so they're fitter. And that tends to be the difference. We saw it a lot of times in FFA Cup games. I'm sure when we get to the fourth round and the big boys come in a couple of weeks, it'll happen again.
And they're also very defensively astute last season, specifically. So it's going to be interesting to see whether they can keep that defensive solidity in NPL 1. So it's going to be interesting to see how O'Connor Knights go in that regard. Next up, we have the reigning champions Tigers FC, and I've lost my notes.
We've written them off already, haven't we? They've lost 7-1. Ryan's watching this now. No chance now, mate.
No.
Right, you mentioned there, Ryan Grogan is the coach this season. 2021 position was first place, like we mentioned. 2021 points and win-loss record: 11 wins, 3 draws, 2 losses, 36 points overall. FFA Cup qualifying final winners, of course, and FFA Cup round of 32 match against RPLI Cup, where they fought. They definitely fought, that's for sure, having 2 players sent off and Jacob Cole with that amazing performance. I mean, the fact that everyone shared it from the A-League pages to everyone else on social media shows that. It was in a very, very impressive season overall. When I talked to a few of the coaches, they all said, look, Tigers were the standout. They were the standard over that season. Not only did they win the FFA Cup qualifying, but they also finished on top. And they played some great football. They showed their pace on the counter. They were very, very lethal in that regard. So they'll be looking to build on that. And you mentioned we've all mentioned the Charity Shield. If anything, it's just going to be a fire under their bellies to prove that was just a one-off for them in that regard. Noteworthy thing to take away from the interview I did with Ryan, which was up a couple of days ago. The AIS will be the home ground this season. I mean, if you only watched last season, you hadn't watched previously, you would think, oh, mate, the AIS was their home ground last season, considering how many matches due to COVID were, and due to weather as well, were rescheduled for midweek at AIS. So I know they're historically based in Cooma, but at the end of the day, Ryan said that due to a lot of the COVID issues, it was just easier to organize for AIS. So it'll be an easy transition for them in that regard. But I guess Seoul based, they are still based in Cooma in that regard. I know they don't have the name, but that is where their origins come from. So, Russ, what can you please mention a few ins and outs and what you think about Tigers this season?
Well, first thing that springs to mind is we won't be standing on the back of Mick Creamer's ute in the middle of the snow.
In the middle of the snow, that is true.
Freezing in commentary, but yeah, so that's an interesting aside for them. At the top of the broadcast, I mentioned defensive woes that they had. I forgot to mention that Lars Ulrich has come in from Monaro Panthers, didn't play on the weekend, was suspended, I think. So he will be back and he will make a difference to that defensive side. They've not brought many players in. They brought him in, Tommy Kirkridge has signed full-time, as we mentioned as well. It's a bit like, Michael will appreciate this, it's a bit like back in the day when Manchester United used to win the league. And Jurgen Klopp the same at Liverpool. You don't change a championship team too much. You just look at areas where you can improve and you add little things here and there. And that's what Ryan's done. He's looked at his team. He's lost Lockie Griffiths, of course, mainstay defensively. So he's brought Lasse Ulrich in to replace him. He lost Jay Kelly out wide, so he's brought in Tommy Kirkridge to replace him. So he's trying to replace those players, and they'll play with a similar kind of style last year. Big loss to them just this past week, of course, Christian Junner. Heading back to Brindabella Blues to play with his father Ray. We saw him in Australia Cup action yesterday.
Very recent, yeah.
Was it yesterday? So many games. So yeah, it was yesterday. So having him, losing him as well gives them a little bit less at the back. But you know, they're the Tigers, and every season we expect them to score lots of goals, and they will, because they've got so much quality going forward. They ship a lot as well. It's been the same ever since Gabby Wilk was there as well. They're a very good team to watch, aren't they? Because they're just as likely to score 4 or 5 as they are to concede 3 or 4. And that's why we love watching them, because they play with that attacking mindset. And Ryan's got that ingrained into them, and we saw it last season. Not to say that they can't shut up shop and defend when they need to. They did last year, didn't they? That game you mentioned earlier, Michael, on the AIS Synthetic, when they won 2-0 against Canberra, Croatia, which effectively, in the end, sealed the title for them. Is the depth of the squad strong enough, like we spoke earlier? You looked at the bench on the weekend, lots of young talent on there. I thought a couple of boys that came on did really well. So depending on how they transition into NPL 1 will depend on how Tigers go. But they are the champions for a reason. They finished top of the pile. They've won the last 2 Australia Cup qualifying rounds back-to-back. First team to do that in our region as well. So they're there to be shot at, and they were shot at on the weekend, but they'll come back. They'll lick those wounds, check what went wrong, and probably put it down to a freak display and hope it doesn't happen again, which I'll be very surprised if it did. Ryan will certainly tighten that up.
That will be the first ones to tell you that Griffiths losing them in defense is a big blow for them. So how do you think they're going to sort of? I know Lasse's coming in, but he is a different type of defender. Yeah. He's a different type of defender. So how do you think they're going to sort of replace him in that regard? Do you think there's just going to be a little more link-up play between the midfield, or do you think they might just sacrifice a few more goals, but sort of get that link going to push forward?
Well, we saw on the weekend the return of Daniel Sparrow
Yeah.
Will make a difference. When Daniel Sparrow was about 60% fit, I think, on the weekend. He's been out for a long time now after he busted an ankle, I think, in a game that we did at Melrose for Canberra Olympic, clearing the ball off the goal line. And he's been out for over a year and a bit now. So having him back in the team, of course, it was his first run on the weekend. He got through about 65 minutes or so. He's not fit, but when Daniel Sparrow is fit, he's a different entity, and he will help that defensive solidity. He can pass the ball as well, and that should free up to Anthony Timotheou to play a bit more prominent role further forward. Last year, he had to play a bit more defensively and sit in front of that back four and spray some balls around. So Sparrow will no doubt do that. Lasse comes in, as you said, different kind of defender to Lockie Griffiths. Still a decent ball player, maybe not as composed in possession as Lockie is, because Lockie loved to bring the ball out of defence, but I think Lasse brings a bit more physicality to that back four. Good height, good threat from a set piece as well. So it's going to be different to see them play. I think they'll play slightly different if Sparrow is playing, because it enables them to be a bit more, flood a few more players forward, because he will offer that defensive solidity, much like Rathjen does at Gungahlin United. In terms of their attack, when you've got quality players of the likes of Popovic and Strucker and Josh Galevsky, you might put them in a pattern, but basically you're asking them to go out there and play what they see, because they're good enough to do so, and they're good enough to score plenty of goals.
So yeah, look, it's if anything, if anyone's looking at that Charity Shield and say, "Oh, I'm not sure about Tigers this season," like I said, if anything, I think it'll just shore the fire up in their belly to prove them wrong.
It's pre-season at the end of the day, as much as it's a trophy on the line. There's a trophy on the line, and silverware is on the line. I don't think either club are looking at that going, that's defining our season. Because if they are, then they're probably in for a rude shock in about 3 weeks.
Lastly, we have West Canberra Wanderers, who finished 6th last season in 2021, and their coaches for this season. So coaches, they've got Dom English and George Ekombopoulos at the helm this season for it. It's a tongue twister, man. These Greek surnames.
It's the man who said
they're a nightmare. Yeah, that's right. So my apologies if I pronounced that wrong, but I promise I gave it my best shot. West Canberra, they defied most people's expectations last year. Former coach Ulysses da Silva had them winning some big matches last season, and he really got the best out of his group. We call him the best dressed coach in Canberra for a reason. And, his departure, obviously now to the Gold Coast, safe travels to him, and a huge loss for West Canberra as a club, most definitely, considering how well he did. But, they're in good hands now with their two co-coaches now that are ready to take over the squad and look to build on that for this 2022 season. So, they've had a decent amount of changes. They've lost some of their veteran players, to the likes of Monaro, like we mentioned earlier, Di Franceschi, obviously at Monaro, and Jay Selden at Monaro as well. So 2 big losses for them. One obviously in defence with Di Franceschi, and the other up front in the attacking areas in Jay Selden. So, they've seemed to have brought in some standout young players, such as, Bo Harvey from Monaro, who killed it in the 23s last year. He was excellent in the 23s. For anyone that was paying close attention to 23s football last year, he was great. So with a younger squad, it'll be very interesting to see how they perform this season. So sort of similar to Belconnen in terms of no one seems to be looking at West Canberra or these two clubs to expect big things and maybe win a title this season, but they'll look to defy expectations for sure, similar to last season, because like I did say, West Canberra managed to put up some very good performances last season, albeit they did struggle for the majority of the year, especially when they had that sort of long bit of, that long run of form where they were not able to sort of get themselves out of a rut. But there were performances last year where they were fantastic under Ulysses, and hopefully they can sort of piggyback off that and contend for the top 4 this season. So we'll wait and see what happens, but I wouldn't be surprised for West Canberra to produce some similar results as they did last season. I thought in some of those games against the bigger clubs as well, they were excellent. So for them, it'll just be all about continuing some of that form that they showed in 2021 and bringing that over into 2022 to improve on that 6th place finish. Russ, I mentioned some of the departures for this football club and some additions. Do you mind going through some of the ins and outs for West Canberra? And what are your expectations? Obviously, 2 coaches that'll be taking over the helm this season for West Canberra in 2022. They had some bright sparks last season, but overall just couldn't really put it together in terms of longevity in the shortened season. But what are you expecting this time around?
I forgot to mention him in the Monaro Panthers preview that we did, but losing Gabe Cole is a big loss for them in the middle of the park. He was excellent actually in the Charity Shield as well. So much so that you almost think he's been there for such a long time, Gabe Cole. But he's one of the new arrivals at Monaro as well. And losing him, you mentioned it, Michael, losing all their experience, the people like Aaron Cashman, Seamus Carr, Adam DiFranceschi, Mason Interlandi, the goalkeeper's goal, Michael Mensah, Chris McEwen. So they've lost all that experience, but they've replaced it with young, enthusiastic, hungry players. And that's going to be a benefit for them on the synthetic surface, specifically at Melrose, where they play all their home games. Of course, we've done games there before, and even the top sides have gone there and struggled on that surface. It's a real advantage to them. They brought in people like Jenna Cerruti from Tuggeron. He was on the fringes of the Tuggeron first grade. Neat and tidy player, can play as a 9 or a 10. James Driscoll, another who was on the fringes of the Monaro Panthers last year, has come across. You mentioned Bo Harvey. George Pavese from Griffith. He had a couple of runs for the Rhinos back in the day, so he's back in the Premier League. And they've got a couple of young goalkeepers. Jacob Wiseman's come across from Tuggeron United, so he'll add some solidity into that backline. And young Christian Nell from Brindabella Blues will be in there to learn a bit also. So it looks like their acquisitions have all been young players with a purpose to play at pace on that surface and to take advantage of it. And in pre-season, they've done exceptionally well. I mean, the 2 matches that they've completed, there was a bad injury when they played Coniston and their friendly was abandoned after an hour. They beat ANU 2-1 and they beat Gungahlin United 3-1. So looking at that form, we talked last season about how we were struggling to see how they were going to put some performance together with that young group. And they made us look silly again by getting a massive amount of points in the opening 5 or 6 rounds, which effectively, given their slump towards the end of the season, saved them from relegation. That and the fact that Tuggeron couldn't buy a win drew about 7 or 8 in a row. But new coaches, new ideas, again, same thing we talked about. I'm really interested to see how the dynamic's going to work with George Economopoulos, and I don't know if I said that right, and Dom English as well.
Might have been better than my pronunciation.
I'll be interested to see how that works, whether one of them is doing something or the other one's doing something. We've seen in higher levels of football how the joint coaches sometimes don't work. These two obviously work together before, they know each other very well. So it will be interesting to see how that dynamic works. But I think we're going to see a young and vibrant team playing possession football as quickly as they can. And I wouldn't be surprised if they score a fair few on the counter.
Let's just quickly mention the first round fixtures. No predictions yet. We'll save that for this first episode because I think we're a bit too far out to do that. Even though if we look at it though, I reckon our predictions in the first episode last season were probably better than some of our mid-season predictions.
Who won last year, by the way?
I'll have to bring that up for next episode.
Okay.
I do have it written down somewhere. I think it's actually pretty balanced though in terms of like I might have did better in NPLW. Michael might have done better in NPL 1.
I think
I'll have to look that up. I'll bring that out next episode for when Jeremy comes on for NPLW. But yeah, so we've got West Canberra Wanderers via O'Connor Knights Saturday, April 2nd, 2:15 p.m. at Melrose Synthetic. Belconnen United versus Monaro Panthers Saturday, April 2nd, 3 p.m. at McKellar Park. Tigers FC versus Gungahlin United Saturday, April 2nd at AIS Grassville 1. Canberra Olympic versus Canberra Croatia Saturday, April 2nd, 3 p.m. at O'Connor Enclosed. For people who like to see NPL action on both days, don't worry. There will be probably more Saturday games this season because O'Connor have replaced, obviously, Tuggeron, and Tuggeron play most of their home games on Sundays. O'Connor will mostly play on Saturdays. But if I'm not mistaken, Gungahlin and most of Canberra Croatia's home games will be on Sundays. I know there are a few games that will be on Saturdays, but we'll probably, even though it was pretty well balanced last year, this year we'll probably see more Saturday games.
Panthers will play with their Saturday evening kickoffs as well.
So it won't be all the time.
No, there's a good chance that when there are there are 4 games on a Saturday, if the Panthers are at home with a later kickoff, we will be able to squeeze in some commentary at 3 o'clock and then at 5:30, 5:45.
Or even this one.
Yeah, or the 2:15 and the Wanderers. The Wanderers kickoff times now changed from 12:15 to a more manageable 2:15. I mean, 12:15.
Especially if you work on Saturday morning.
You never out of bed by then, were you? But yeah, it's going to be good. We're looking forward to it. We haven't picked a game yet for first round, but there's a couple that jump out there, isn't there?
There certainly is. Before we leave, Russ, and thank you for coming on. Any last thoughts before we head off? Any plugs or anything like that?
Yeah, looking forward to the season, of course. Keep in touch with the action that we've got coming up on NPL TV. Of course, we've got Bar TV still involved, bringing us the Australia Cup round 4 games. We've not picked them up yet. We've got, I think, 3 matches that we can cover in that round. And obviously, if we don't cover your club, there are ways and means that we can get sponsors on board to actually make that happen. And depending on when this goes out, there's Premier League futsal action on Wednesday evening live on all the usual channels as well. It's the Canberra Futsal Premier League, so it's a little bit of a change of pace. And next Wednesday, the 16th, will be the grand final of that also. So Angelo Constantino will join me Wednesday, and we'll go from there. But thanks for having me on again, lads. Always a pleasure to chat NPL with you, and let's hope that we get a full season in, and we're talking about plenty of good stuff this year. And I've also spoken to some of the referees, and there's a real feeling that we can get them, a couple of them, on to discuss what we might decide, decisions that we were unsure about this season as well. So they're keen to come on and give their point of view, where there may be a penalty decision or something that we've not seen or we can't understand why. They can come on and explain to us exactly what we're seeing, and hopefully build that rapport up with them and a little bit more understanding of the laws of the game.
That sounds awesome.
Fantastic.
Michael, thanks for coming on. Any last thoughts from you?
No, I mean, all the sort of 2 p.m, 3 p.m. kickoffs on a Saturday, I mean, that sort of pains me a little bit because I play at 1 o'clock on a Saturday. So by the time I wrap up, all those games are starting. So I'm definitely hoping to get out to those sort of Saturday evening / Sunday games this season. So once I do my business on the field, I'll be catching all the action across the CPL, MPLW, and NPL this season. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, and we'll be back most likely next week with MPLW, and then we'll be back with CPL and Chris Webb as always for that one. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining me, lads. And that was episode 44, MPL season preview. We'll see you next week.